Well, welcome back to another edition of Commodity Chat from Trader PhD. I'm the head of market content, Dawson Schmidt, and joining me as always for this discussion is Ag Market Advisor Nick Lawrence.
Hello, everyone.
Well, Nick, we're back for another week, and I think we got a lot to get through today. Talking much about planting, weather, maybe a little bit of the cattle on feed report that came out last week, but just wanted to start again, as always, with just what's going on with the current war or not war with Iran. The latest that we saw here this morning was that the White House extended the ceasefire with Iran. That was due to lapse at 8 p.m., I believe, last night. That ended up being extended indefinitely. So I guess there is a ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, but
Well,
I don't really know what all that entails.
it feels like Trump is invoking the mercy rule.
Mhm.
Like his comments around it seemed very like we might as well have a ceasefire. They're pretty well dismantled, um, and they're really almost like they're trying to figure out who's taking the helm on the leadership within the country to where like I'm inferring a lot into this, but I'm curious if he thinks kind of stopping some destruction and trying to help that leadership along to where things can negotiate better. I wonder if he thinks they're having trouble negotiating better because of all these maybe
Mhm.
independents jockeying for position. Again, I'm inferring a lot here. I'm putting a lot of words in his mouth per se, but it seems like he's kind of invoking the mercy rule and trying to see if they can get better positioned for better negotiations.
Yeah, the last thing I saw was that they might meet on Friday, um, to kind of get things rolling. I think they were supposed to meet, what was it, today, in Pakistan. That ended up not happening. JD Vance went with a delegation, I believe, to go there. That just wasn't going to happen. And so, yeah, it sounds like the Trump administration is just giving them time essentially, but effective still is that, the Strait of Hormuz is not necessarily open, at least in a reliable sense to where we're going to see a lot of ships transiting through the strait yet. I mean, that means that there's over 2 million tons of fertilizer still stuck in the Gulf. I think over 100 million barrels of oil still stuck in the Gulf. So things got to get moving here soon, and we're just not seeing that as, kind of in a limbo period.
Yeah, and I mean, last comment on this, so we don't spend the whole dang time talking about it, but
Mhm.
it does matter. Every day that passes and every day the product doesn't move, I think there is potential for some of these southern hemisphere production areas, planting back wheat and stuff like that. I feel like there's plenty of risk there. I mean, really, getting our product in position for next season. I know there's ample time to do that, but the more supplies get depleted, the more catch up has to be done, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, every day we just think things are going to start moving and it just doesn't happen. And at some point, we need to maybe um, come to the realization things aren't going to move for quite some time, and it is going to affect things.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing is that it's going to be slow and steady once it, officially reopens to less risk. Wanting to get started though with our actual conversation here again, wanting to bring up the planting that pace that the crop progress report has been coming out with these last couple of weeks. Started getting those reports earlier this month and starting to see some interesting developments, especially on the soybean planting side of things. On Monday, USDA said that the U.S. soybean planting pace hit 12% complete. That was a record pace. It beat out the what was it, 2023 record pace of 9% for the same week last year as of this last Sunday. And things seem to be kind of moving along pretty good here for some states specifically. I don't know if you got some extra comments on that, Nick, but there's some states that have really been pushing along while, others have started off a little bit wet here, but that could ramp up here soon.
Yeah, here in the home state of Iowa, cold and wet, not much going on here. All the producers I talk to here, barely getting anything done. Maybe some spraying here and there, maybe just some burn down type stuff. But it's really been, for the most part, about it. But then, as I start talking to guys through Indiana, Kentucky, Illinois, this map matches what they've been telling me. Uh, the ground's fit to pull a planter, uh, but for the past handful of weeks, and that could be changing now to some extent, but for the past handful of weeks, they were just worried about just cold temperatures and then maybe getting a cold shot of rain, those types of things. So they just were not planting corn due to that risk. Um, and and beans, they were more than willing. I mean, early last week, I was talking to guys through some of these high planted areas. They only had a working day or two left to plant beans, and they were done. So they've been going at a pretty good clip there, and I think as these soil temperatures warm and cold rain and risks get reduced, that corn's gonna start going in at a pretty good pace too.
Yeah. Yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, we're already starting to see a solid pace here with the corn planting that we're above the 5-year average, a little bit above normal pace too, but I mean, not quite going at a record that soybeans going in at, but we're not really seeing any real concerning signs as about 11% of the crop was already planted as of this last week. And, we're kind of seeing a similar story with those states that were really ahead on soybeans, were really ahead on corn. And then, some of the other areas that were not quite ahead, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're starting to get some corn planted, maybe before a lot of those storms went through. But I'm kind of seeing some similar dynamics here with the corn side of things as well.
Yeah. As soon as Iowa and North Dakota can catch a break in some weather here, I think it's we're going to backfill that playing pace very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, for right now, to me, there's not that many warning signs. We're not in the middle to the end of May yet,
Mm-hmm.
so good potential still there. It's not even close yet.
So speaking of warning signs, though, may not be coming on the corn and soybean side, but again, we've constantly been watching, what's going on with this winter wheat crop. And, the big story here is that these crop conditions, particularly in HRWE areas, are just not doing the greatest. And so U.S. crop report came in with another decline in those ratings. Now we're only 30% good to excellent, compared to, I think it was still like 45% or so last year. Yeah, I mean, these are some of the lowest ratings that we've seen for this time in about a decade. And so we saw saw ratings down here, in 2022, 2023, which, ratings can be volatile throughout from year to year. But, the fact is that we've seen persistent soil moisture deficits for a lot of those areas in Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, or the panhandles in general. Needing to get more moisture for some areas. Saw the government radar or government 5-day forecast still maybe trying to get some rain in the Central Plains, but still not. There's still going to be some key areas missing out on that moisture.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that many, handful of podcasts ago, you know, 2, 3, 4 podcasts ago, we were, consistently really watching whether a lot of that HRW crop would get some production critical moisture. And boy, it just kept missing. And I think that last shot that had the potential to salvage something, I think that miss, I mean, it really stuck a fork in a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and that's just on the HRW side. But, I'm really interested in the SRW country, whether, like Missouri, Illinois, Indiana. We're coming out of dorm season, got very, very cold there for a little while. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
interesting if some yield gets knocked back there. Also, kind of what that does. So, a cocktail of having, lowest acres since what it was like 1919 or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was, and then um, some post winter issues, whether it's moisture related or freeze related. Could be a little bit of sleeping giant, I guess. I don't want to get too dramatic and say, it's going to the moon or anything, but that mixed with some some of next year's southern hemisphere crop. Potential reduction in production in Australia and Argentina, just due to inputs. We've been preaching the past handful of weeks to stay patient here, kind of let this play out. I think I still stand behind that for right now. That there's warranted risk to the upside. I think.
Yeah, going to be really interesting to see what the USDA comes out with for print on the May WASDE report on if they kind of recognize these low conditions and just lack of soil moisture for a lot of these key areas, and if they're going to come in with a lower yield on that May report as we kick off the new crop year balance sheets.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. And then, well, side note, I guess, Kansas Crop Tours when?
I believe
Week?
I want to say it starts this week, Kansas
Oh,
Crop Tour. Or
oh,
no, sorry, May.
May. That's what I said. The second week of
It's
May.
late May, late May.
Oh,
I
late
I
May.
remember I think it's like May 21st or something like
Okay.
that.
We still may have
Um,
a couple weeks there
yeah,
before we get too much.
yeah. So I'll be curious to see what they come out with as well, and we're going to be again watching that, see what they say. Wanting to kind of move on here though is that today we're releasing a new piece, just kind of going over the correlation between El Nino years and U.S. crop yields. And so what we have is what we've seen and what we've been identifying with our talks with Eric Snodgrass week to week is just this sharp transition from La Nina this past winter over to enso neutral, over to warming ocean temperatures off of in the Pacific Ocean, that is showing kind of some correlations of maybe some weather, the potential for some good weather here in the U.S. And so just kind of wanted to highlight the fact that we are expected to be in an El Nino year, which tends to favor precipitation for a good portion of the country, access to Gulf moisture, hopefully helping out a lot of these southern states that have been experiencing soil moisture deficits, especially in the south, the southeast, into where we could see kind of just this general warming of ocean temperatures that's in this highlighted area, bringing the chance for some decent yields this year. And so what I was kind of going back to some strong or relatively strong El Nino years like 1957, 1965, 82, 02, 23, 15, 09, kind of these strong El Nino years. And so what we kind of found was that, on these years where we had a decent El Nino or a strong El Nino, corn and soybean yields, we were seeing decent, either above trend line or at or near trend line yields for basically those years. And so we kind of wanted to take a look at, just a quick look about crop prices, kind of what they did in those years, comparing them to the previous year at harvest. And, what we found, and, this is absent of other factors, whether if it's on the demand side or other world supply risks, is that what we found is that, El Nino years, we typically don't see necessarily an issue with U.S. crop yields, essentially. So with this next graphic here is that, we see wetter than average weather for a decent portion of the U.S. There are some pockets of drier than average precipitation, but overall, there's not a blatant signal that is showing that there could be an issue if we have a decent size El Nino or a decent presence of El Nino come this summer. And so then this last graphic is just kind of showing that, yes, we've had for most of these years, crop prices have not really been higher year over year come those new crop time periods where we transition from for the November for soybeans, the December for corn. Now there are 2 years that kind of really pop out. That's 1972 and 2002. Well, guess what? 1972, we had big demand from the Soviet Union. We were, shoveling grain to them hand over fist. So demand was great during that year, even in the presence of an El Nino. 2002, we also had an El Nino, but there was also some temperatures, some cooler temperatures off of the Gulf of Alaska in the western U.S. coast. That does tend to bring some drier signals. And then we've also had some decent demand during that year. So I think those were the two anomalies that really stick out. That it's just like, all else equal, El Nino years might be bringing, not a not too worrisome signal for U.S. crops.
Yeah, and so this is what makes a market, right? You've got the potential here for for some decent production here in the U.S. Um, and given what we know today, some um, neutral carryouts for the old crop marketing year. And so on the surface, or just taking in isolation those two things alone, which is where we were pre-war,
Mm-hmm.
it's a pretty bearish scenario. Um, but this is what makes a market, right? Then we've had this war kick in. We've had some uh, energy price spikes. It's dragging along inflation and input price increases and all these things that could potentially be more bullish, right? And so I mean, this is exactly what makes a market. This is why we've been consolidating around where we're at. Some unknowns on this Trump G meeting that's going to come up in just a couple of weeks. Does do negotiations go beyond soybean purchases, etc. So it's an exciting time to be in to be in this market. There's plenty of stuff to watch, and so yeah, again, looking at decent production prospects as long as we can stay current on planting pace. But then some of those other more bullish factors um, globally, I think, is what's really balancing things out. And then, one of the last, I guess, potential, very scratching the surface, bullish factors um, could be that safrinha crop. Now, really only bringing this up right now just to kind of make sure you guys know that we are keeping an eye on this. Um, where the majority of the safrinha crop is, they should be roughly in their reproductive stages of that crop. Things are, kind of starting to get dry there a little bit, which isn't necessarily a production killer. One of the big things that we're going to kind of keep an eye on is the heat, especially in this reproductive stage. Do things really crank up in heat plus lack of moisture, and then does that really put the crimp on potential production? So something to keep an eye on there. Again, not like blaring warning signs yet, but it is something that we would like to just let you guys know that we are keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, for much of the year, and what this last graphic was showing, I was kind of, showing the below average precipitation for the next couple of weeks, as well as, the current temperatures are above normal right now. But I mean, we see some, precipitation deficits a little bit over the past 30 days. But what, we've been told by Eric Snodgrass in the past is that, moisture deficits to this smaller degree is not necessarily an issue. But yeah, I mean, we're entering some critical stages, so definitely some things to keep an eye on.
Yep.
Wanting to finish off here, though, is that, last week we had the latest cattle on feed report kind of confirming, tight supplies. Nothing new that we all didn't already know is that, total feedlot herd in the U.S. Has, for the most part, continues to be lower year over year, albeit, less than 1%. And then placements. Actually, I did show that first, but placements have also been, lower year over year. We've had the multiple factors of just tightening cow supplies, leading to lower calf crops, as well as, the lack of Mexico cattle transiting north and entering our southern feedlots.
Yeah, I mean, not too many comments on this. Cattle on feed seemed relatively steady as she goes. To some extent, there wasn't too many big surprises here. We're not completely falling off last year's supply levels. Um, I mean, one could definitely make the argument that there could be a little bit of shortness in finished cattle here sometime this summer, sometime this spring type of a time period that, yeah, I think continues to support our markets here. Um, and I think, that's really, I think all I have to say about the placements and the inventory.
Yeah.
But this is kind of the kicker, I think, for you, right?
Yeah. So my favorite thing about the on feed reports is when we have the um, quarterly percentage of, how many steers are in feedlots, how many heifers are in feedlots, specifically heifers. We track this. We've been tracking this one for a bit now, especially as we've been going through the contraction phase since 2021, or even a little bit earlier than that during the drought years. Is that, during these liquidation phases, we tend to get higher amounts of heifers in feedlots because, we're not holding those back. We're not breeding them. They're helping contribute to the overall feedlot supply. We got the latest data showing this last week showing that, the percentage of heifers did drop to about 37.3% of that feedlot herd. Now that is a decent drop, quarter over quarter, but you look at where we were at a year ago, and a year ago we were not building the herd, and still a year later we're holding a very similar percentage of heifers in feedlots, a historically high percentage of heifers in feedlots, and so based on this, I mean, it's really hard to say that not really feeling like we're entering a big herd expansion phase, based on this data alone.
No, but it's trending that way, right?
Right. Well, hopefully. I mean, we had that big drop, come 2025, or come in 2020, I guess 2020, early 2025, kind of built back up throughout 2025. And now we're kind of back down here from the first quarter of 2026. So, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to see that start to trend because we topped out in 2024. And so does this at least mean that we're done putting, higher amount of females inside of feedlots? It could be. Maybe some early signals. I think honestly, this will be probably one of the earlier signals that we get of herd expansion, is if we start to see this percentage drop.
Really trending down. Yeah. It is at a bit of a crossroads compared to that 2020 through 2022 timeframe.
Yeah.
Um, is there enough? Yeah. Is it kind of turn around here and kind of creep back up, or does it continue to fall? Yeah, something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. I think we've talked pretty ad nauseum for a lot of topics, but again, we're going to continue to watch a lot of these developments. Again, with the conflict or the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran right now, as well as just how the U.S. Growing season is shaping up. You kind of got our thoughts on an early read here, and we're going to see those developments here moving forward.
Yeah, again, to put a bow on it, broad range of topics today. But 'tis the season, right? There's a lot of stuff to keep track of, a lot of stuff to a lot of moving parts here. And we're not trying to add to the noise. We're trying to simplify it for you guys. So keep an eye on all the articles that Dawson puts out on the app that could really help you guys keep track of stuff in a simplified way. And then obviously, like always, reach out if you need anything.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, we'll leave it right there. And again, I'm Dawson Schmidt.
I'm Nick
And
Lawrence.
this has been Commodity Chat from Trader PhD.